The current situation at Europe's largest nuclear power plant is almost beyond comprehension. For more than a week, six massive nuclear reactors, each comparable in size to a multi-story building, have been operating under what experts describe as a last line of defense. This is not a drill or a safety test. It is the stark reality unfolding at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. On September 23rd, an unprecedented event occurred in the 40-year history of the station. All external power lines failed simultaneously. The final high-voltage line, the Dnipro line, which supplied electricity to the plant, went offline. As a result, the entire facility has been relying solely on backup diesel generators for power, an emergency measure that has now persisted for over 7 days. While it might sound reassuring that generators are functioning, the truth is more alarming. These generators are designed for temporary use, serving as a bridge until normal power supply can be restored. They are not meant for prolonged operation, yet here they are, running continuously. This situation raises serious concerns because extended use of such backup systems is inherently risky. To grasp the severity, it's essential to understand what Zaporizhzhia truly is. It's not just a large nuclear plant. It's an energy titan that, until recently, supplied approximately 20% of Ukraine's electricity. The station comprises 6 reactors with a combined capacity of 6 gigawatts. However, a crucial point often overlooked is that even when reactors are shut down, they do not cease to generate heat. Radioactive decay inside the fuel continues, producing significant heat that must be constantly removed through cooling systems to prevent overheating. Cooling requires pumps powered by electricity. These pumps need a reliable power source, not just during operation, but also during long-term shutdowns, which can last weeks or months. Currently, all 6 reactors at Zaporizhzhia are in what is called a cold shutdown. They have been offline for over a year. Despite this, the fuel remains inside, still emitting heat that demands continuous cooling. Normally, the plant is connected to the external power grid, which supplies the necessary electricity for cooling. When reactors were operational, they generated electricity themselves, feeding it into the grid. Now, with the reactors offline, the station has become a consumer of power, drawing energy from the grid solely for cooling purposes. The recent power outage cut off this external supply, activating automatic safety systems that switched on 18 reserve diesel generators housed on site. While this backup system sounds reliable, there is a critical caveat. These generators must run non-stop and require substantial amounts of fuel. According to international nuclear safety standards, the diesel reserves at Zaporizhzhia are estimated to last roughly 20 days with regular refueling. The problem is that these generators are not built for such prolonged operation, and if all of them fail or if the fuel runs out, the consequences could be catastrophic. Experts warn that the countdown to disaster could range from mere hours to several days, depending on how quickly cooling can be restored. Without active cooling, the nuclear fuel inside the reactors will rapidly overheat, leading to potential core damage or even a nuclear meltdown. The situation remains precarious, highlighting the urgent need for a reliable power supply to prevent a nuclear catastrophe. Initially, temperatures will rise to several hundred degrees, then escalate to 1,000, causing the fuel to begin breaking down. Once temperatures surpass 1,000 degrees Celsius, a phenomenon known as perocerconic reaction will occur, where the fuel cell shells start chemically reacting with water, releasing hydrogen. As heat continues to increase, the fuel will melt, forming a molten radioactive mass capable of burning through the reactor's 20-centimeter thick containment shell and collapsing downward into the sub-reactor space. This sequence mirrors what happened at the Fukushima Daiichi plant in March of 2011, where an earthquake initially cut off external power, followed by flooding that disabled backup generators. 3 reactors melted down, hydrogen explosions destroyed the buildings, and radioactive water leaked into the ocean. The situation at Zaporizhzhia is often compared to Chernobyl's, but crucial differences exist. Zaporizhzhia's reactors are of a completely different design. Compact, with a diameter of only 4.5 meters and lacking the massive graphite core of Chernobyl's RBMK units, which measured 11 meters across and contained around 2,000 tons of graphite. During Chernobyl's disaster, this graphite burned for a week, releasing radiation into the atmosphere, and the reactor's lack of a containment shell meant that all debris was expelled directly into the sky. In contrast, Zaporizhzhia's VVER reactors are built with a fundamentally different approach. Their core is contained within a sturdy steel shell, 20 centimeters thick, designed to withstand pressures exceeding 150 atmospheres. Surrounding each reactor is a massive concrete containment structure, called a containment vessel, measuring 45 meters in diameter and 60 meters high. This shell is engineered to endure extreme stresses. In case of a severe internal accident, it can contain the release of steam and radioactive materials, even if pressure surges. It is rated to withstand impacts from small aircraft weighing up to 6 tons. These reactors are relics of the 80s, built as second-generation units with a robust double-shell design. Modern reactors, currently under construction, feature even more reinforced containment systems, capable of withstanding impacts from a Boeing 747. Nonetheless, no nuclear plant worldwide was originally designed with military attacks in mind. These are civilian facilities, and their concrete shells could crack under extreme force, creating a breach. Inside such a containment, roughly 370 cubic meters of radioactive water, dissolved with boric acid and circulating through the reactor's active zone, are stored alongside the nuclear fuel and the equipment maintaining pressure. The most dangerous scenario involves damage to the reactor core itself, but accessing it is extremely difficult. The core is deeply embedded within the building, housed in a narrow pool beneath thick concrete slabs. To reach it, one must first breach the outer shell, then locate the reactor hull, and finally penetrate the containment ceiling, an intricate and perilous process. While it may seem almost impossible, let's imagine a scenario where such an incident occurs. The consequences would largely depend on whether the reactor was operational at the moment of damage or had been shut down. If the reactor was running at full capacity, it would be under immense pressure and extremely high temperatures. A breach in its containment would trigger a powerful steam explosion. Water under pressure exceeding 150 atmospheres would instantly vaporize, unleashing a forceful blast of steam. Along with this, radioactive particles, fuel fragments, and volatile substances would be expelled outward. If the protective shell were compromised, all these hazardous materials would be released into the atmosphere, and that's when the real danger begins. It's important to understand that not all radioactive substances pose the same level of threat. Their dangers vary significantly. The first and most immediate threat is iodinaminous stotrizidodin, often called volatile because it easily vaporizes and can be carried by the wind over long distances. Its half-life is only 8 days, which sounds somewhat reassuring. After a week, its amount halves, and after another week, it reduces to a quarter. However, this short-lived radioisotope can be critically dangerous for people nearby during that period. But iodoneminous sto-trizit-odin is just the initial wave of danger. It disperses quickly and decays rapidly, so it's a transient threat. The more persistent hazard is cesium-minus sto-trizit-seem, with a half-life of about 30 years. This isotope was responsible for the long-term contamination following the Chernobyl disaster. Cesium-minus sto-trizit-seem settles on the ground, contaminates soil, and enters plants, animals, and humans, remaining in the environment for decades. After Chernobyl, radioactive clouds indeed spread across Europe, but a crucial detail is often overlooked. While traces of cesium-minus sto-trizit-seem can be detected even in Scandinavia and on the Ural Mountains, their concentrations are so minuscule that they pose virtually no threat. The further from the source, the fewer radioactive particles settle on the ground. Maps of contamination after Chernobyl show that dangerous levels of radioactivity extended only several dozen kilometers from the plant. Beyond that, areas required restrictions on agriculture, and even further out, the contamination levels dropped to natural background radiation levels, which are always present in the environment. Scientists have developed computer models to predict what might happen in the event of a severe accident at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. These models generate detailed forecasts for all European nuclear stations, illustrating potential scenarios. The resulting maps can be alarming. They show radioactive clouds covering vast territories, reaching into Germany and even approaching Moscow under certain wind conditions. Such images can induce panic among the public, but there is an important aspect often overlooked. These models are based on reactors that are actively operating and can explode due to internal failures like the Chernobyl accident. When a reactor runs at full power, a chain reaction of uranium fission occurs, causing the temperature in the core to soar to about 300 degrees Celsius and pressure to skyrocket. Inside this boiling vessel, pressure builds until it suddenly erupts, sending a powerful jet of material skyward. In Chernobyl, graphite burned for over a week, releasing radioactive particles into the atmosphere, which were carried by the wind across thousands of kilometers. In contrast, the 6 reactors at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant have been shut down and in a cold state for more than a year. Their chains of nuclear reactions have ceased, pressure is minimal, and temperatures are relatively low. The fuel, specifically the spent fuel assemblies, has long since disintegrated, leaving the reactors essentially empty after months of inactivity. This fundamentally alters the potential consequences of any hypothetical accident. If a shutdown reactor were to be damaged, it would not produce the massive release seen at Chernobyl. The heavy fuel particles would largely remain contained, and only some volatile elements might escape into the air, but on a much smaller scale. The scenario previously discussed, often called uksomi, involves reactors that automatically shut down after an earthquake, but then lose cooling, leading to overheating and melting of the fuel. This causes the reactor cores to breach their containment structures, forming molten masses that interact with concrete and water, releasing hydrogen that eventually explodes, destroying the buildings. Even in that case, the atmospheric release would still be far less severe than Chernobyl's. The main danger in the uksomi scenario is water contamination. For Zaporizhzhia, such an incident could mean radioactive pollution spreading into the Dnipro River and potentially reaching the Black Sea. The plant is situated near the Kakhovka Reservoir, which has been significantly altered following the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam last year. If molten fuel escapes its containment and interacts with groundwater, radioactive substances could seep into the river system. While this wouldn't instantly render all water in the Dnipro or Black Sea deadly, dilution would reduce concentrations with distance. Local areas could experience severe contamination. It's important to note that such a crisis wouldn't unfold overnight. The process from complete loss of cooling to fuel melting typically takes several days. Additionally, on the plant's territory, there is another often overlooked facility containing a vast amount of radioactive material: the dry storage for spent nuclear fuel. This site appears as a large open concrete platform with rows of massive containers, each about 6 meters tall and weighing over 100 tons. These containers are multi-layered steel and concrete structures designed to safely store used fuel assemblies removed from reactors. Previously, spent fuel was transported for reprocessing to Russia, but Ukraine has long since abandoned this practice. Instead, it now employs American technology for long-term dry storage. After being removed from the reactor, the spent fuel is first cooled in water pools for several years within the reactor buildings. Once cooled, it is sealed in airtight containers and placed outdoors on the storage site, awaiting eventual disposal or reprocessing. The storage facility can hold radioactive materials for decades, a practice common in the United States and regarded as safe. The containers used are robust, resistant to harsh environmental conditions, and capable of withstanding hurricanes, earthquakes, and extreme temperatures. However, like all infrastructure on the site, they are not designed to endure direct damage from military conflicts. Recent shelling near the storage area has already caused damage to radiation sensors, and while the containers remain intact for now, the threat of further harm cannot be dismissed. So, what happens if one of these containers is compromised? Inside, there are no pressurized or flammable substances, nor volatile materials like those that decayed long ago. Instead, they contain long-lived isotopes, notably plutonium with a half-life of 24,000 years, along with other heavy elements. If a container is broken, most of these radioactive materials will stay near the site, as heavy fuel fragments won't disperse far. The resulting contamination would likely be confined within a few kilometers, but cleaning it up would take decades, similar to the long-term efforts needed after the Chernobyl and Fukushima disasters. On October 1st, Rafael Grossi, head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, issued a stark warning, describing the situation at the Zaporizhzhia plant as unstable from a nuclear safety perspective. He emphasized that the plant is operating on the brink of its protective limits. While there is no immediate danger, relying on these safety systems over the long term is highly risky. A key concern for many is how far the consequences of a potential accident could spread. It's important to dispel a common myth. There is no fixed radius of impact. The extent depends on the type of incident, weather conditions at the time of release, wind direction, and numerous other factors. Computer modeling by scientists from various research institutes has yielded surprising results. In the worst-case scenario, if a reactor operating at full capacity were to explode internally, radioactive contamination could extend up to 200 kilometers from the plant. This zone would require evacuations and long-term restrictions on land use. Looking at a map, 200 kilometers from Zaporizhzhia encompasses nearly the entire Zaporizhzhia region, a significant part of the Dnipropetrovsk and Kherson regions, and much of Ukraine. It also includes southern Russia, covering areas like Rostov and Krasnodar. Crimea would be fully within this danger zone, affecting millions of residents. Under certain meteorological conditions, a severe nuclear accident could produce a radioactive cloud capable of drifting across much of Europe, reaching Romania, Moldova, Bulgaria, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, the Baltic states, Germany, and Austria. However, the most crucial factor remains weather. Meteorologists can predict wind patterns, calculate trajectories of airborne radioactive clouds, and map out the potential spread. But these predictions depend on real-time atmospheric conditions. The gap between the words dare and will be dangerous is vast, a chasm often overlooked amid sensationalism. Claiming that all of Eastern Europe will become uninhabitable is an unfounded scare tactic lacking scientific basis. Even in the worst-case scenario, it would likely mean temporary restrictions on outdoor activities rather than mass evacuations or catastrophic radiation casualties. Western Europe, including Germany, France, and the Benelux countries, lies far enough away that any radioactive fallout there would pose no serious threat. Authorities might increase routine monitoring, and public concern could grow, but the actual health risk to these nations would remain minimal. In Ukraine, this is not the only nuclear power plant. Yet fortunately, no traditional accidents have occurred there so far, and no lives have been lost due to radiation exposure. Despite the attention surrounding the Pavor nuclear power plant and its potential dangers, it is far from the only concern in this critical period of history. The situation requires vigilance, but panic is unwarranted, as the real threat remains manageable and limited in scope.